we live in a democracy and it's important to participate in. So I can't individually change the whole thing, each as an individual, but you can do your part, and it feels like having these discussions and putting out arguments that hopefully persuasive on various topics and things, and doing it in a lighthearted way. Hopefully that has some positive. It's doing our part a bit.
I'm James Purser, and this is Purser Explores the World. The world of big media is in flux. Television networks and newspapers are laying off journalists and rationalising their operations in the face of shrinking advertising revenue and audiences fleeing to the internet for their news and entertainment. However, the world of small media has never been more vibrant. Ubiquitous access to media generation tools and a culture of JFDI, that's just flipping do it for the more polite amongst us, has led to the rise of podcasts, vodcasts, blogs, new media models, and even the revival of some old models. For this episode, I'm going to be speaking to two people who are part of that world. Jane Gilmore is one half of the team responsible for the King's Tribune newsletter, a Melbourne-based operation that has grown from a double-sided printed A4 sheet to take its place in the media landscape in its own right. Featuring articles written by such luminaries as Greg Jericho, Tim Dunlop and Helen Razor, it is grown purely based on the passion and the effort of Jane and her crew. Jeremy Sear is one half of the on-air team that makes up the Something Wonky podcast. Along with Dave, they explore Australian and global politics on a weekly basis, bringing their own perspectives to the events of the world. Okay, enough of the introductions. Let's start off with Jane, who very kindly interrupted an evening of fun and frivolity to chat.
The very, very first King's Tribune was 2007. That was a double-sided A4 page that was a little newsletter for our local wine bar. So that was how we started.
Okay, so how did it go from being an a double-sided A4 page to the very fancy-looking website I'm looking at the moment with contributions from a whole range of different people?
It's been kind of a weird process. It started, as I said, we did the November 2007 was just the little A4 page, and it could have just died there, but somebody said do another one, so we did another one, and then it turned into a regular bar newsletter, and we started getting interest from local advertisers, so we took it outside the bar, and it turned into a little local rag around Elwood and St Kilda. And the thing that's always driven it has been the readership, certainly not the advertisers who fell off fairly quickly, and it's never really made it neat, but the readership has always driven it. Sort of, we've had trouble keeping up with that. So it took it outside the bar, it took it outside St Kilda, it took it outside Melbourne, and eventually ended up going national. And we followed the readers without ever being able to keep up with, well, how do we get this to pay for itself? Because it used to be just a thing that was handed out. We used to leave them in cafes and laundromats. So eventually, once we started going national, we had to say, well, we think we should pay the writers. It's one of the things I've always been very passionate about, is that writers should be paid. They provide a service. They are a profession. It's a craft. It's a skill, and they should be paid for it. They need to be paid for it to do it well. So the only way that we could ever do that was to go back to the readers and say, we need you guys to pitch in for it. And I always figured that if we were doing it well enough that they would, and if we weren't doing it well enough that they wouldn't, and that would be fair enough. That would be telling us that we didn't deserve to keep going. But we're now 5 years down the track, and we're still just breaking in most of the time. So I figure the readers are telling us we're still doing a reasonable job.
What inspired it in the first place?
I think I enjoyed the process of it. It wasn't just the writing part of it. It was the whole process of editing, of collecting different voices. And even when we were back in the bar, it wasn't just Justin and I writing. It was we would get the other bar patrons and we'd nag them and and poke them with sharp, pointy things until they'd write things for us. And that process of getting a collective group together and people who wildly disagreed with each other and putting them all in the one place and saying, hey, here's a collection of thoughts or facts or opinions or funny stories or drawings or something. Just here's a collection of voices that are saying something. And the discussions, I mean, I think the bar was a really good microcosm of what the magazine became, because we would sit in the bar and hear people talking about articles that we'd published, and there'd be huge debates over various things that we'd published, and I'd see that discussion going on and watch people talking about things that they wouldn't have otherwise talked about, or hearing about ideas that they wouldn't have otherwise come across, and it was just so brilliant to watch that's still carries on now, that I see that happening on social media.
I was going to say,
sometimes in a bad way.
Well, I was going to say, Twitter's now become your bar, really, hasn't it?
Pretty much, yeah. It's in some ways it's very similar. In other ways, it's very different, because the bar was a very, very small personal surrounding, so everybody knew each other really well. You could see everybody's life going on, and it was one of those bars that you get in the inner city that became a substitute lounge room for all the people who lived in tiny little box-like flats around the area.
Mm-hmm.
Twitter has some of the same thing, but it disconnects a lot of the personal. So there's some dynamics that are very, very similar and some that are wildly different. But the same level of discussion of ideas and thoughts is still the inspiration, I think.
Yeah, well, I noticed a couple of days ago there was a very heavy discussion about one of your most recent, your most recent issue of the King's Tribune has an article which attracted a lot of discussion.
Yes, it certainly did. Look, it's one of those things that you'd like to think you get it right all the time, but no one ever does. And in that particular case, I got it wrong, and I did a huge disservice to the writer and I think to the magazine by not. I dropped the ball, and unfortunately, I dropped it quite badly on that particular case.
Well, I wasn't asking for a mea culpa. Don't worry about that. Because God knows.
No, because when you get it wrong, you say, yeah, I got that wrong. You face up to it, you try and fix it, and then you move on.
The way I've been doing podcasting for a number of years now, on and off, and the way I look at it, if they're passionate enough to tell you that you're wrong, you're doing something right. Yes,
and I really did also particularly notice that, with one or two exceptions, almost all the discussion that we got over whether or not we got that wrong was a really genuine discussion about it. It was people saying to me, well, no, hang on, you hadn't thought about all of these things, and you hadn't thought about the damage it would do, and you hadn't thought about this. And that kind of discussion of ideas and thoughts about it was really valuable for me. And it was another, and we've had a few of them over the last few months of reminders of we're not just a little blog anymore. We have to lift our game. People expect a certain standard, and I have to make sure that we stick to that all the time.
How are you finding that shift from being a little A4, around your friends at the pub, to having an effect like that?
I think that's the difficult part, because I have trouble keeping up with the perception that the audience have. In some ways, I still think of us as not much more than the little A4 page where we were given a lot of leeway. We were allowed to make mistakes. It didn't matter if we got things wrong. People would just, they're just this little amateur thing. It doesn't matter. And I have trouble keeping up with the perception now that people have of us being part of the media. I still sort of, it's almost like when somebody calls you Mrs., you look behind you to look for your mother. When somebody talks about me as being a part of the media, I look around to think, who are they talking about?
Hold on, you're mainstream
remembering. Well, in some ways, yeah. When Mark Colvin pinged us on typos, I got offended, and then I thought, no, hang on, he's expecting us to operate at a certain standard. He is expecting we are part of the media and we have to operate at a certain standard. Wow, he's right.
And when Mark Colvin says you're part of the media, you're part of the media.
Well, yeah, exactly. When he's saying that he expects a certain standard of something that we were doing, when I'm interviewing Jonathan Holmes and as he said, and publishing a transcript of an interview full of typos, I'm not doing my job properly. And I had to sort of think, well, actually, yes, he's right. So it's a constant process of catch-up, of where we're seen and where I think we are, I'm never quite there. So I think, like anyone who ever produces any kind of creative content, I'm never ever happy with what goes out.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, my view of where we're sitting in the public perception may not always be entirely accurate either. So it's a complicated process.
As an aside, did you see the oatmeal cartoon on writing for the internet?
Yes, I thought it was brilliant.
It
and I
goes
think
so
anybody
far
who has ever, anyone who's ever produced content for the internet was reading through it, nodding until they were almost sick. Yeah,
pretty much. All right, so one of the things that has been, as you said before, is that you're just breaking even. So this is a labour of love rather than a labour of profit. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Absolutely. The Tribune is never, ever going to make profit. And when I say it's breaking even, I mean we pay the writers and the printer. I don't take none of the editorial staff take any salary, and I don't ever expect to. But the aim has always been that we need to pay the writers and we need to be able to pay the printer without having to be too much out of pocket. And there are still a couple of occasional months where we are a bit out of pocket, and it's one of those things that I think, well, it's what else would I spend that money on? I'd be going shopping and buying too much alcohol. I'd rather spend it on this.
So in actual fact, you're saying this is a way of stopping you from drinking yourself to death?
Well, yes, it's a health benefit.
While simultaneously giving you reason to start drinking yourself to death.
Yes. It's a little bit of a circular market there.
All right, so you're online, but you're also still doing hard copy, dead tree versions of the King's Tribune, aren't you?
Yep.
Are you planning on stopping and going fully online, or just keep going with the hard copies?
As long as the readers still want the hard copies and are willing to pay for it, I will continue to do it, because I think you read things differently in hard copy to the way you read them online. I know when I read physical magazines, I get something different from even reading the same article online. It's easier to skim online than it is in paper, I think. And if we do have an online subscription option, if I was getting everybody going into that and only the one or two diehards on the print option, then I'd certainly be more willing to look at it. But we're still only about 7% online options.
Okay.
So that tells me that the readers want the hard copy.
Also, the hard copy has the added benefit of you don't have to read the comments.
Yes. Well, we don't really do comments terribly often. Occasionally experimented with leaving them open, and now we have it where only subscribers can comment, and only when I remember to turn them on. I don't really see the benefit in it a lot of the time. If there's a discussion about an article, usually it happens on Twitter, and I think almost all our subscribers are on Twitter. So they can talk directly to the writer and they can talk to each other, and that seems to work for them. Apart from the occasional email accusing me of being a Nazi censorship capitalist pig, which I've had, nobody really seems to bother that we don't have the comments, and I think it means that the article stands on its own and then the discussion happens separately without a comment thread distorting your view of what the writer's saying. So I think it works better that way.
And then so Twitter is your back channel, basically?
Yeah. And we publish all the Twitter links to all the writers so that anybody who really wants to discuss the ideas further can certainly get in contact with them, and I don't think any of our writers would be resistant to the idea of talking more about an article on Twitter.
Oh, God, no.
But no, I mean, they love it. But I don't see the benefit, the amount of time that's required for moderation because of all the weirdos there are who want to put all kinds of idiot shit on your website.
Yep.
The time that we have, everybody who works on the Tribune has a full-time job, so the time that we have I would rather spend on finding writers and doing the editing and putting the magazine together than moderating comments. Cool.
Now, do you want to mention your Kickstarter before we go?
Yes, we are trying to, as I said, since the 2007, until we got it to the point of breaking even, we have accumulated a fair bit of debt in trying to get here. So we're now in the position where I can run the Tribune or I can run the debt, but I can't do both.
Yep.
So I've got to make a choice. So we decided to try a crowdsourcing thing to clear the debt so that we can keep the Tribune going. As I said, it's a matter of paying writers and printer or paying off the debt.
Well, fair enough.
So,
I mean, yep.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, you were saying?
Well, I'm just having a look at at it now. You've achieved 38% of what you're looking for. So, what happens if you can't get the Kickstarter finished? What happens if you don't achieve your target?
Well, I deliberately chose that one because it's not one of those ones where you have to get to your target or you get nothing, because I figure if whatever we can get that will be enough to clear some of the debt, which we've already done. So we had a huge outstanding bill for one of the old printers we used to use. That's been cleared. There was a couple of outstanding debts for writers. They've been cleared. I've reduced the Tribune's credit card bill, so the interest payment every month, that's all been cleared. So I figured if we get halfway there, then I can carry maybe some of it, work away around it for the next few months until we can get clear of it. What I couldn't do was a whole lot. So even if I only get halfway there, well, I will find a way to keep the Tribune going, because it's a dream that I cannot give up.
You can find the King's Tribune and details about the Kickstarter project at kingstribune.com. As we can see, the road from personal hobby to something bigger is never smooth, especially if it's a project that you are driving not from a position of profit, but for the love of the project. The King's Tribune is now, for better or worse, a publication of note. And when you're a publication of note, people tend to pay attention to what you're saying. Right, moving away from the print arena, we're going to hear from Jeremy next about why he keeps doing what he does with something wonky. Pure Poison. How did that start? How did you get involved in doing Pure Poison for Crikey?
The website or the podcast?
The podcast.
Oh, right. Well, the podcast wasn't really for Crikey at all. We had been doing the site, and no, my memory's actually not all that good anymore. I think that I had... I'm trying to remember if I had actually met Dave before we started doing the podcast or not, because what happened with Pure Poison originally was that we had a completely different group, and Dave actually came in as a friend of Scott Bridges, and when various people went their different ways, it ended up just being Dave and me left, and fortunately it turned out that we got on really well, and so then we thought, you know what, we should try doing a podcast. And you know what, I can't really remember anymore what the original impetus behind it was. It was just, we gave it a try and we enjoyed it and we got on well. Like it wouldn't have worked if we hadn't got on so well. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, it just seemed to be a nice way to sort of sum up and sort of put some structure on Pure Poison, which otherwise is sort of just a set of, you know, random rubbish that happens is basically a more dragged out version of that Quality Journalism's Tumblr, which does what we used to do on Pure Poison, but much more concisely. Have you seen Quality Journalism?
No, I can bring it up now, though.
Have a look. It's hilarious. Just what is the URL? I think it's Quality Journalism, but journalism is spelled JERNALISMS. It's a Tumblr. It's basically like Pure Poison except faster.
Okay. All right. Well, so you started out, you found that it didn't suck. So you kept going. Yep.
And yeah, I think we both had, and I think originally there was a bit of ego in it. It would be nice if we were doing something that had, I don't know, some kind of sort of immediate media sense. But then ultimately it's just an enjoyable way of summing up sort of what's going on in the week and having sort of a back and forth, which we don't have you don't really have it on a joint site because you both write your own things, and it's kind of a way of sort of joining it together. Sort of you have a dialogue back and forth, which is completely different from writing a blog. Mm-hmm. I mean, you have it with commenters on a blog, but you don't have the same. Yeah, it's not.
Yeah, that's special. Commenters are special.
Yes. There is something to the immediacy of it, and yeah, I just think it's a fun conversation, and we enjoy doing it. So we just record it, and people seem to enjoy downloading it, so we've kept doing it.
So what was the initial response to it? I mean, apart from you guys enjoying doing it, and it was good for you, but was it good for other people?
We had enough nice comments that we didn't give up on it immediately, and really, there's no money in it. There's no neither of us are building some kind of a profile. Like, I can understand comedians doing podcasts for free because it builds their other output, and same with journalists, I suppose, like builds their profile. We're just doing a blog, so we haven't really got any profile in particular to build. So it's all pretty much just a mix of ego and just, I don't know, there might be a small element of wanting to sort of contribute to the national discussion a bit, have a say in things that we don't think are being said elsewhere. But there's an awful lot of enjoyment that comes from having nice iTunes comments, really. It's like, oh, there's a nice iTunes comment. It was all worthwhile.
Oh, I've been validated.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
I started a blog in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
I started a blog in the first place because I had all these, I was just so opinionated about various political things, and my then wife was not keen on hearing them. So the idea was, I don't get it all out of my system. That didn't really work because it didn't get it out of my system. It encouraged me to do it more.
Yes, my dear wife has also had to suffer me being very political and very ranty about politics as well. I think she's just sort of decided to cope with it. She hasn't spanged me with a frying pan yet.
Well, that's the other thing, because you get to have a rant, but you get to have somebody pull you back on it.
Mm.
So it works quite well in a way that a single podcast might be harder, because you don't have somebody to sort of, like, both of us can, Dave and I can both pull each other back when we're getting a bit ranty. Although it's more Dave pulling me back from getting ranty, I'll admit.
All right, so they closed.
The
Sorry,
language not democratic. Yeah, That's right. Sorry.
That's right. So they closed. Crikey decided that Pure Poison was going to come to an end. What made you decide to go from Pure Poison, the podcast, to something wonky?
We had actually been thinking about that. We'd long since decided that the part of Pure Poison that we enjoyed the most was actually the podcast. We had been trying to figure out who we would hand Pure Poison over to anyway, because we had kind of, over 5 years of it, well, not of Pure Poison, but of the whole, I suppose if you can't watch or whatever, we'd sort of said what we wanted to say. We'd started repeating ourselves. Certainly the people we were commenting on had long since been repeating themselves. So we kind of reached a point where we were, and a lot of the posts were, as we've said previously, link back to previous posts on it. So by that point, we were quite keen. We weren't actually all that sad to leave the blog behind. And when Crikey decided they didn't want to run with it any further, that sort of absolved us from the need to find someone to take it over. We just couldn't keep running a Pure Poison podcast if we didn't have a Pure Poison blog. And we also had got a bit sick of the requirement of the Pure Poison podcast of having to talk about the Australian media all the time, and we wanted to have a chance to discuss things more broadly. So we just wanted to have a chat about sort of the political wonky things, and Kerry suggested the name Something Wonky, and so we went with that.
All right, so it's not just you and Dave either. I'm just having a look at your About page. Your podcast, you actually get somebody else to do your editing for you.
Yes, Jacob Holman does the edit most of the time. He's been, the last couple of episodes he's been in the US, so Dave's had to edit them, and he's done a terrible, terrible job. So it'll be good when Jacob's back. Dave originally edited them, but if you've got a family and kids, it takes a lot out in the time aside to record and prepare a podcast, let alone editing it. So it made a huge difference when Jacob volunteered to come on and help.
Have you had much outside help with this, or has it just been a labour of love between the three of you, basically?
It's just, we've had on Something Wonky, one of the things that we like about it is that we've got a Stuck in My Craw segment that has other people contributing viewpoints, which I think it's quite nice having a different voice occasionally on the podcast. We haven't nutted down exactly how to do Stuck in My Craw, because we've had comedians, we've had people from other sides of politics that we then argued with, and I'm not quite sure whether they felt a bit hurt that they had contributed something, and then we argued with them, but obviously they weren't still present because the segment's recorded earlier, and then we comment on it like it's a post or something. So the niceties of how to do that without, whilst having a discussion about what the person said, and an open discussion that you don't necessarily agree with them, without making the person feel that you've invited them on and then got stuck into them. But I think it makes a difference having other voices. I think it's quite good that we've got other people doing reading the excerpts for things if we've got excerpts to read, like the email inbox of Doom we have. We try to have other people reading them. So there's that contribution. But it's still it's basically just Dave and me do a recording on Tuesday night, and Jacob edits it, and it goes up on Friday.
So how are you finding that because you're doing it as a labour of love, how are you finding it as competing with real life, so to speak?
Well, put aside, it's just a regular weekly activity, I suppose. It's harder for Dave, who has a family. I have a wife. He has a wife and 2 kids, so there's he has a lot, and Apex and a whole lot of other, he has various obligations. It'll be more challenging as I get into life in Wagga, I suppose. I don't find it too difficult to fit in at the moment, and it's something that I enjoy doing. So it's fun, enjoyable weekly activity. But back in Melbourne, it was something I had to put time aside for. But I enjoy it's stuff I'm going to be ranting about stuff anyway, and it's really like a social. It's like having a friend around, really.
A bit like a catch-up.
Yeah, well, it really is, because Dave's a good mate and it's a good way of doing it. So,
all right, so where to from here? What are you going to do with Something Wonky?
I have no idea.
It's one of those silly questions. It's a bit like, what do you want to be when you grow up, isn't it?
I would like Something Wonky to be an astronaut.
Yes.
I have no idea.
Something Wonky from the International Space Station.
Yeah. That'd be awesome. Do you know what? I don't know. Look, imagine if Something Wonky was like a radio show each week or something. But I just can't. It's fairly niche audience. I can't see. I don't know where it would grow to. I mean, it'd be nice. I mean, we've both got very strong views, and I'd be more than happy to spread them further. I don't know how appealing that is in general. I don't know. I'm not a listener. The listeners say nice things, but realistically, lefties ranting about politics is not. There's not. I mean, yes,
there's not a shortage.
No, and it's not a look. You can. It's weird. You can sell writings ranting about stuff. For some reason, that does have a broad appeal. You've got the entire radio networks that are based on it, and there's not a lefty equivalent. And people go, "Oh, Philip Adams," but I don't think Philip Adams is the lefty equivalent of those stations at all. I don't know. I mean, Would
you want to be considered the lefty equivalent of, say, the 2UEs or 2GBs?
No, I wouldn't. But I would like there to be one. I think it would be nice if there was one. I'd like to. There's a couple of viewpoints that I think I'd like to have heard more often. Mine, Dave's. I don't know. I don't know. It feels like we live in a democracy, and it's important to participate in. So I can't individually change the whole thing. Each as an individual, but you can do your part, and it feels like having these discussions. And putting out arguments that are hopefully persuasive on various topics and things, and doing it in a lighthearted way. Hopefully that has some positive. It's doing our part a bit. Mm-hmm. Pushes things slightly in the right direction, or the left direction.
Both Jane and Jeremy work in different mediums, one print, the other audio. The Tribune is run to try and recoup the costs involved in production, whereas Something Wonky is available free and clear. However, they both share something. Passion. Not just a passion for their subject matter, although that is definitely there, but a passion for the medium that they work in as well. There are thousands of projects like these two across the globe, and increasingly they are forcing their way into the public arena in ways that have not existed before. I can't predict what the future media landscape is going to end up looking like, but I think it's a fair bet that people like Jane and Jeremy are going to be much more prominent. Okay, that's it for another episode of Purser Explores the World. In 2 weeks' time, you'll get another dose as part of Discovery Friday. Don't forget, you can follow Angry Beanie on Twitter, Facebook or Google+. for all your update needs. And please feel free to leave a comment or suggestion.